Welcome to the Islamic House of Wisdom. I just wanted to congratulate you all on the birth of Imam Hussain, Misbah al-Huda wa Safinatun Najat. A man whose leadership and actions are the embodiment of the teachings of Islam, the Prophet, and humanity. So much so that his words resonated and still inspires millions of people today, Muslim and non-Muslim, friend and foe. Imam Hussain even inspired people in passing. On his journey to Karbala, he met a Christian family, a newlywed, Wahab, who was so moved and inspired by the words and actions of Imam Hussain that he decided to dedicate his life in the service of God and join the message of Imam. When Wahab died, his mother was so strong and patient that she said, "What we spend in the way of God, we don't ask for return." What we spend in the way of God, we don't ask for return. How many times do we give, but we give with 100 conditions, strings attached? Oh, you need to do this, 200 different contracts. Let us not only be touched by the sacrifice of Imam Hussain, but moved to give back to our communities and mosques. Now, many years later, there are those who draw inspiration from men of God. For example, the first president of India was quoted as saying, "The sacrifice of Imam Hussain is not limited to one country or nation, but it is the hereditary state of the brotherhood of all mankind." Tonight's keynote speaker, I was sent upstairs. He was in the library. We can't get him away from these books. He's always looking for an opportunity to educate himself. I was walking down with him towards the auditorium, and he said he loves this weather. He came from Virginia, where it's 90 degrees, and he said, "I prefer this weather over Virginia," so he must be a true Dearborner. I'd switch places with him any moment. Tonight's keynote speaker is an ordained Presbyterian minister who has dedicated his life to learning, writing, educating, research, faith, and fighting. I think I ran out of fingers. And fighting Islamophobia. Dr. Selden Harris has a doctorate degree in philosophy from the University of St. Andrews. He holds a diploma in Islamic law and also a diploma in Shi'ia studies from the Al-Khoui Center. Dr. Harris has been conducting research on Islamic economics and is well-versed in Imam Baqir Sadr and Dr. Ali Shariati, and has examined the curriculum of various seminaries around the world. He has such an impressive resume that if I were to stand here and continue to list his accomplishments, we might miss out on a delicious dinner. So without any further ado, please help me in welcoming Dr. Selden Harris to the podium. With a round of applause.
Thank you, Mehdi, and many thanks to Imam Elahi and the wonderful folks here at the Islamic House of Wisdom for giving me this wonderful opportunity of being here with you on this day, this wonderful day. We are all Americans, you, me, all of us, and it is my hope that more and more Americans, more and more non-Muslim Americans may learn more about Imam Hussain, what he has meant to the world. I bring you greetings from many people, different people from around the world. I bring you greetings from Dr. Syed Saeed, who is a friend of mine, a friend to many here. He works in the Interfaith office of the Islamic Society of North America. I bring to you greetings from many Muslim friends of mine around the world who know that I'm here today. I think especially of the many Muslim friends I met when I was a guest in the Islamic Republic of the Gambia in West Africa this past September, as well as many new Muslim friends that I met when I returned to Cuba with my wife this past November. There are 20,000 Cuban Muslims now, and I visited the brand new mosque in Havana. What is also interesting to note is that Cuba has had a relationship with Islam for many, many, many years. I'm not a Spanish speaker by any way at all, but a friend of mine who teaches at the University of Havana told me that the colloquial word for Cubans of African descent is El Moros, which means the Moors. And many Cuban Muslims will tell you that when Ferdinand and Isabella came and took over the throne of Spain in 1492, Jewish people, and non-Catholic Christians and Muslims are told either convert or leave. And many of the Moors who had a wonderful civilization in Islamic Spain left and they went to Cuba. And in fact, if you went to the Loyano Presbyterian Church in Havana, Cuba, which is where I stayed and where I've gone over the past 20 years, the architecture is Moorish. So I am very, very glad to be here on this special day. And I've changed what I'm going to say about 20 times, so I hope it works, because that happens. And on the way here from the Imam's house, he talked about much of what we are, what we do, no matter how old we are, and I just turned 59, is shaped by memories. Oh my goodness, memories, he's right. So for the past hour or so, I have been changing that. But let me just begin by saying, first of all, that I am a retired Presbyterian minister in the PCUSA, and I retired at age 55 after 30 years because I wanted to pursue my real passion, which is interfaith dialogue, interfaith cooperation, and ways that we can work together. For the past, since I retired, I've defined myself as a son of Ibrahim, and I tell people when I speak to churches that every day I read the Hebrew Scriptures, the New Testament, and the Holy Quran, all as God's Word. And I also believe that in many ways for me, the Holy Quran answers all the questions that have been asked by people throughout the ages. Everywhere I go, I carry this book with me. This is one of the volumes of Al-Kafi, one of the great works of Shi'a literature. And every morning, I could recite it by memory, but I like to read it. I want to read you something I've read for the past 25 years. It's from The Necessity of Knowledge. We are told to acquire knowledge is obligatory on every Muslim. Allah loves those who have the longing for knowledge. It also says to acquire knowledge is imperative. And my favorite, I've heard it said, O people, you should know that the climax of religion is to acquire knowledge and to act upon it. Verily, the acquisition of knowledge is superior to the acquisition of wealth. And every day for the past 25 years, I've asked myself, what is it that I can learn this day that would maybe make me a better person? As I was leaving Norfolk, Virginia, flying in the airplane, when you get up high like that, you can see places you don't always see from the ground. Places that you look at, you realize these have made me who I am. Some of those places are very, very special to us. Others of them remind us of things that aren't so special, but things we have to remember to make us better people we are now. As I was leaving the plane, sometimes, even though was coming west, northwest, we go out over the Chesapeake Bay and over the Atlantic Ocean. That way we kind of get away from the path of the Navy jets, which is always a good thing to do, that are coming and going all the time. I looked over here and I saw the Navy base, yours and my American Navy base, that today has a fleet that protects you and me and the whole world. But I also know from history that before that was called Norfolk, it was called Chesapeake Beach. And we kind of forgot that because we don't like to remember things that make us sad. Well, let me tell you about the history of Chesapeake Beach before it was a Navy base. It was the end of the horrible Middle Passage. That time when millions of enslaved Africans were stolen from their homeland and brought to the New World as slaves. Now, what a lot of people don't know is the vast majority of those enslaved Africans were Muslims. And African Americans are the only American group that actually left a life, or in their case, were stolen from a life where they were better off than they came here. Because life in West Africa for West African Muslims was a wonderful place and a wonderful place to be. I looked over here. On this side, I saw Norfolk State University, a historic African-American university where I'm an adjunct professor. And I thought about liberal arts education. I am a recipient of a liberal arts degree. Now, for many years, we were taught as Americans of European descent that liberal arts education came to us from monasteries in Europe. Well, that's not true. And we know that history is always written by the winners. So I have set my goal in life to learn the histories of those that didn't win. Well, when Oxford and Cambridge and the University of St. Andrews in Scotland, where I went, and the University of Paris were founded in the 11th and 12th centuries, there may have been one library in all of London and one library in all of Paris. But in Muslim Spain and Granada, there was a library on every street corner. The same in Baghdad, a half a world away. And the earliest professors at European universities were Muslim Aristotelians that came to Europe to teach. I also learned in my time in St. Andrews that liberal arts education was more finely created in houses in Iraq and Iran. I learned in 529 AD, the Byzantine Greek Emperor Justinian the Great, who some might consider a fundamentalist Christian today, closed both Plato's Academy and Aristotle's Lyceum. Why? Because they taught pagan philosophy. The professors of those schools went over the border out of the Byzantine Empire into Iraq and Iran. Iraq in those days might have been part of the Persian Empire or the Byzantine Greek Empire, depending on what year it was. And those professors set up philosophical schools in Iran. And I've read the curriculums that they had and the curriculums they passed on to the Shi'ia houses when Islam came to that area. The first three things were taught were grammar, logic, and ethics. The first three trivium of the seven liberal arts that Plato and Aristotle gave to us. So in this day, I come to you, a descendant of European Americans, to you, Americans who are Muslims, and I say thank you. Thank you for giving me my education. It was not preserved in the Christian world. You received it, refined it, made it better than it was. And even today I am told that you can go in the streets of Najaf, and at night you might see a student who might call out a professor that he or she sees and ask a philosophical question. The same thing that Cicero did in the Roman Forum a long time ago. That is what you have preserved, not just for the United States, but for the world. But then as I'm in the plane headed this way, I looked over there and I saw Yorktown, Virginia, where your and my Revolutionary War ended. And as those British warships were leaving the York River, going out into the Atlantic Ocean to come back, I imagined that standing on the beach were Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, my new favorite founding father, and also I see Imam Hussain coming there, talking to these newly independent people. And he said, so, you won the war. That's great. You hated all the way the British put you down, took your money, everything. Now, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to make yourself better? And then I see that Imam Hussain telling these founding fathers and future presidents, let me give you 3 words of advice of something you could do in this great nation. Because you right here on the coast, ocean this way, and who knows what out that way. Let me tell you 3 things you ought to do. The first thing is this. Always welcome the newcomers. You yourselves are newcomers. And I remember as the chief of the Nottoway Indian tribe, I'm from Nottoway County in Virginia, the Nottoways are the native tribes. She told me one time, because my late father was her doctor, she said, "Sel, the Americans that possess the land, all of you, have got to remember that we're all immigrants. To be an American is not a race, it's not one religion, it's preserving ideals of freedom, justice, and liberty for everyone, and never ever turn anyone away from these shores." That's the first thing. The second thing is freedom of religion. God is bigger for anything that you can ever imagine. In fact, the chief of the Nottoway Indian tribe said, "We let you settlers stay in Virginia because the land was not ours. It belonged to the Great Spirit." You see, the Indians were Muslims and they didn't even know it. They believed in Tawheed, the oneness of God. So there needs to be freedom of religion for everyone. There is no one American religion. To be religious or not religious is your choice. So no matter what your religious confession is, unless you're protecting freedom of religion for everyone, it's not happening. And finally, I would imagine Imam Hussain saying this to the founding fathers. And this is the most important thing for all of us today. And it's this. I can imagine Imam Hussain saying, "You know, I'm looking in the future, and guess what? In about 260 years, you're going to have your first African-American president." Now, I can imagine they couldn't believe that, hearing that then. But it's going to happen. And I'm going to tell you some wise words that he will quote to you that he learned from his greatest teacher, his mother, who that is all of our best teachers, isn't it? His mother. And his mother said this, "Barack, you can always be better tomorrow than you are today. So work at it." And President Obama told us many, many, many times that we as Americans can be better tomorrow than we are today. So we need to work hard at it and make sure that everyone who has the piece of the pie has it. And I can imagine all those things as I saw those wonderful things that were very, very important to me. Very quickly, for Imam Elahi's memories, there are certain things that I want to touch on very briefly that have brought me here today. And I am an American who rejoices in the fact that Islam has been in this part of our country for 100 years. When the first Lebanese Shiites came here in the 1870s and 1880s, and you have made us better than we are. 1978, I was in college at Hampton-Sydney College. At the time, the Iranian Revolution broke out. And I was taking a class called Islam as a Living Tradition. And the professor, Dr. Taylor Reevely, also a Presbyterian minister and a former president of the college, said to us in that class, I've never forgotten this, he said, "You know, it's a shame we have no Iranian exchange students on this campus today, because they could tell us what is really going on." After I served my first church, I did go to graduate school with the intention of studying Arabic-speaking Christian minorities. And I came in contact with the Iranian students that were there, and I was invited, my wife and I, to an interfaith group they were in. And I remember a woman who was in medical school really wanted to come to the United States. This was 1986, but couldn't. And she said, "Sel, do you know who the real inspiration of the revolution was?" I said, "Well, Ayatollah Khomeini, right?" "No." "Have you ever heard of Dr. Ali Shariati?" I had never heard of it. Most Americans haven't. But she put in my hand a book called Religion versus Religion, and I never ever looked back. Again, one of those things that you never seem to know. I remembered who he was, and I had studied that when he was in graduate school, PhD of John Paul Sartre, a committed atheist. Sartre said, were I to be a religious person, I would choose the religion of Shariati. I also learned that in his study group with Sartre was not only Dr. Shi'ite, but also Frantz Fanon, the French-born citizens of Martinique who gave up his French citizenship to be a leader in the Algerian War of Independence, and also Che Guevara. I will speak about him in a minute in the Cuban connection, who also came there, along with Jose Miguel Bonino and Gustavo Gutierrez, very famous Latin American theologians. And I thought to myself, now that's a coffee group I would have loved to have taken part in. Because in that group, those men, some great ideas happened. Throughout my ministry, I was involved in many interfaith activities in the Hampton Roads area. Also, I took part in a TV program. But in 2009, something happened that changed my life and the life of the church I was serving. We were in the habit of resettling refugees to Virginia Beach. I got a call one day from the head of Church World Service of Virginia Council of Churches in Richmond, said, "Sel, we've got a family right here now, right this minute, that needs a home. We don't usually bring people here until they have a sponsor, but they need one now." I said, "Fine, we can take them. We've been looking. We've got a house ready. You know, where are they from?" It said, "Well, we are calling you because we know your background in interfaith. They're a Shiite Muslim family from Baghdad. They had to leave. We had to bring them here." We said, "Bring them on." The Kuba family came. I went to see them and said, "Look, I'm not here to drag you to the baptismal font. I respect the truth of your religion. I have a friend who's an Imam of a mosque in Norfolk. I'll take you there." Family said, "No. Would we be welcome at the church?" I said, "Yes, you will. Even though we're Muslims, indeed you will be." And so they came and became a vital part of our family. What we learned from them was unbelievable. It was one of the greatest interfaith experiences I have ever seen, and was the reason I decided to retire early to pursue this. I had been observing Ramadan for years, but many in the church observe Ramadan in solidarity with this family. The first year after they'd been with us in Virginia Beach, I went by the house and I said, "Maha," she was the mother, she was the one who did most of the talking for the whole family, "what has been the thing that surprised you most about living here in the United States?" Listen to what she said. She said, "Well, I'll tell you this. We do have a place here, and this is home. And what I've learned most is how much like Iraqis you Americans are. How much like Iraqis you Americans are." I said, "Oh, Maha, please tell me. What do you mean by that?" "We Muslims love our children. You Americans do too. We Muslims want the best, not just for our nation, but for the world. You Americans do too. In fact, your values are very, very Islamic." And I thought to me, what a wonderful testimony from someone from the outside. And I realized then that we are a nation of immigrants, and we need each new generation of immigrants, because those of us who've been here longer forget those things that make us great. It's not our wealth and our prosperity and all the rhetoric you hear coming from the White House today. No, it is the people from all parts of the world that have dreams that come here. Finally, I had the privilege to travel to the Islamic Republic of the Gambia in West Africa as a guest of their government. The most amazing 3 weeks I've ever had. I went to the village of Jufra, Kunta Kinte's village. I prayed in a mosque that was right on the place of a mosque he would have prayed in. I learned a lot about our African American sisters or brothers by meeting the people in the land that many of them came from. I learned about West African religious pluralism in a way that I had never ever known before. And it was wonderful. And I'm still processing this. The Gambia, which is the smallest nation in Africa but follows clear Islamic values. I traveled in rice fields that they are 2 years away from harvesting enough rice for every African man, woman, and child to have enough food to eat. And on that day, I said, you know, not only was slavery an evil institution, something I'd known for all of my life, but we need to do something about it. I want to close with something that I discovered the first time I went to Cuba in 1997. But it's something that I think should be a message to all Americans, especially American Muslims such as yourself. And it comes from an indigenous Muslim whose name was Malcolm X. And what I'm going to tell you, I didn't learn growing up as a white person in Virginia. I had to be told this by my African American sisters and brothers. I became friends with the late Warith Muhammad, who was the son of Elijah Muhammad, who was the founder of the Nation of Islam. And Warith Muhammad, as you know, broke with his father to lead African American Muslims into the mainstream. And I taught many Sunday afternoons in one of those mosques in Norfolk, Virginia. The Imam was a dear, dear friend of mine. Now, Warith Muhammad came to our church as a guest, and that was where my church really got even more excited interfaith dialogue than they were. Well, here's what I didn't know. What I didn't know was Warith Muhammad is the one who encouraged Malcolm X to go on the Hajj. Did anybody know that? I did not know that. And at age 39, I'm learning this for the first time. And I've got 2 master's degrees and a PhD, and I'm learning something I never, ever knew. Because before then, he wanted to have a separatist black nation. But Malcolm X wrote his very famous letter from the Hajj that should be a classic of all American religious traditions. And he said this, and I quote, he said, "Here I am in Mecca. I'm eating from the same plate and drinking from the same cup as white men, red men, yellow men, black men. Yes, we are all brothers and sisters, and I was wrong." You never hear that. I was wrong. And then here's the final thing he said, and forever, how many more years that Allah allows me on this earth, I'm going to be doing this. He says, America needs to understand Islam. America needs to understand Islam. And that is what I intend to do. I want to tell you again, the joy I have in being here with you in this very, very, very special time to be here. Let me tell you that more people in the world know about the great things of Islam than many Americans do, and we are learning, and there are a lot more great things we all need to learn, and you need to teach me and all of our fellow country people, because there is so much more we have to do. I found it amazing that Ali Shariati, my new hero, who is unknown to me, Cuban Christians know everything about him. They know everything about Dr. Ali Shariati because they knew who his friend was, Che Guevara, one of their leaders of justice and freedom and everything. And more people in the world need people like Imam Hussain, who today we see in the legacies of Malcolm X, of Ali Shariati, of Che Guevara, Imam Hussain, who taught us all to look for the people that are most in need. He was a very, very self-sacrificial person. If Bill Gates walked in here right now and gave each one of us $100,000, that would be a nice gift. But you know what? He wouldn't miss it, because that would just not even be a drop in the bucket of all the wealth that he has. But as I close, think about Imam Hussein's sacrifice. My favorite story of him was one day he was fixing his meal. And you know the story. It's old to you, new to me. There was a knock on the door. A homeless man, a hungry man, a man who had no food to eat. You know what Imam Hussain did. Not only did he extend hospitality by inviting him in the house, he said, "Sit here, eat my food. Eat the food that I would have had." In other words, Imam Hussain went to bed hungry that night. He sacrificed as Allah had taught him to do. But that beggar, that poor man, he experienced a blessing. And that's what each and every one of us all need to do. Whatever our religious background, our ethnic background, we need to follow the example of Imam Hussain. So in the words of Barack Obama's mother, we can not only be better people tomorrow than we were today, but we can pass on a better nation. Shukran, and may Allah bless you.